And we've been telling you for several days that the airline Rex was in serious financial trouble. And that trouble stems as much from the boardroom brawl that saw its former executive chairman and major shareholder Lim Kim Hai ousted from the board as anything else. Well, today, EY was appointed as Regional Express's voluntary administrator. Now, the problem is not just for the 600 workers who the Transport Workers Union say might lose their jobs. It's also for the regional communities that will be isolated from affordable air services if Rex can no longer fly. Now, the government clearly knew this was coming, so here's the Transport Minister talking about it this morning.
Rex's continuation is in the best interests of regional Australians, the travelling public, its workers and the aviation sector more broadly. And the government will work very closely with the administrators to ensure a strong regional aviation presence in the future.
Well, today, Rex's capital city services have been frozen. Virgin and Qantas have stepped in to say they will honour Rex ticket holders when seats are available. And late this afternoon, Bloomberg is reporting that the private equity business PAG Capital will offer interim bridging finance for Rex and is moving towards buying the airline. Now, remember that PAG Capital provided the $150 million initially that enabled Rex to lease jets from Virgin and to fly between the capital cities. The administrator, EY, we spoke to them, they declined to comment. But Rex's situation again raises an issue about whether Australia can support more than 2 domestic airlines. One person who has spent more time than just about anybody considering all this is Peter Harris, the former chair of the Productivity Commission and the author of the Harris Inquiry into Demand at Sydney Airport. He joins me now. Peter, many thanks for your time. You've previously dismissed the suggestion that Australia can only sustain 2 airlines as the height of absurdity after this collapse and bonds are before it. Do you still think that way?
Yes, I do. I clearly do. The Sydney-Melbourne route in particular is one of the densest aviation routes in the world, and the prices are by no means as cheap as possible, certainly not as cheap as you could get in other places, for example, in Europe. So there's plenty of capacity in a commercial sense for more than 2 airlines to be operating in a competitive fashion on Sydney-Melbourne, Sydney-Brisbane, plausibly a bit different, but still plenty of capability there. But the regulatory restrictions that affect airlines flying in and out of Sydney haven't been updated for a long time. And that's undoubtedly going to be have been a contribution to this sort of problem that Rex is facing.
So your report has been sitting on the government's desk for the best part of 3 or 4 years now. Do you believe that the government has acted upon it quickly enough to be able to overcome some of these blockages, especially at Sydney Airport, that would allow more competition and therefore more flights?
No, they haven't, and neither has the previous government. So, I mean, both the transport ministers in recent times, since I finished my report early part of 2021, have really been, incredibly bad at not progressing this. Now, the report itself was a comprehensive redesign. It affected things that are beyond simply the better arrangements for accessing slots at Sydney Airport that would bring Sydney Airport into line with the rest of the world. That goes beyond that. Some of them do affect things like noise management at Sydney Airport, but have always kept the 80 per hour cap in place, so there was going to be no extra noise as a result of this. So the report, it's not that it was an easy to implement thing, but it was designed to be implemented progressively and in sensible stages, starting actually with regional aviation in New South Wales, which has been frozen for 25 years in its slot allocation arrangements at the airport. And so even if you move beyond just the fact that Rex entered into the Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane triangle, as it's called. Beyond that, Rex has had problems getting allocation of slots for its regional routes as well. And neither the previous government nor this current government chose to deal with that.
So has enough been done on the question of slot hoarding, which is the accusation levelled at Qantas in particular, that really in many ways blocked out competition, such as from Bonza or potentially from Regional Express?
Well, to the extent that we could find evidence, and we did work with the manager of slots at Sydney Airport for this, there's a possible case for slot hoarding, but it's by no means the biggest problem. I mean, it should be examined, and we proposed a forensic review, and I think the Minister said there was going to be a forensic review, but I certainly haven't seen a forensic review, which means putting an accounting entity into the airport and getting the airlines to provide reliable information on what the actual cause of cancellation of a particular service was. But the larger problems are the nature of the fact that new entrants at Sydney Airport, and that means Rex, for the purposes of interstate routes, would have been a new entrant, can't get new slots, and they are restricted in doing so. And so it's not that it's an impossible situation to compete in. Rex has obviously tried to compete, others have tried to compete, but the point is the regulation is no longer aligned what I would call the most competitive circumstances to support consumers accessing Sydney Airport.
So then put your hat on as the former chair of the Productivity Commission and explain to me that if Rex does not fly anymore to certain regional ports, or indeed all regional ports, what does that do for Australia's productivity?
If we were to see Rex close up shop in regional New South Wales, it would be a serious blow to regional economies. And those regional economies are not trivial. They're very important for the economy of New South Wales. I would expect the New South Wales government to take an interest in this, an active interest in this. I haven't heard much from them, but that will be a serious matter. Now, if you believe what you can read in the newspapers, and so I have no better commercial information than you do, Ross, in fact, less than you will, but those regional routes may well still be highly viable. But since your question was termed in concerning the impact if regional routes were closed, that would be very significant for those economies.
So then go to another aspect of this, and that is whether really we know that there's an in-house brawl between the board and former shareholders and so forth. So let's leave that aside for one moment. Is there more that the government could have done to have made Rex a more viable airline had it acted on your report much sooner than this?
Yes, it could have. And clearly some quite explicit elements of the report were designed to favour new competitive entry at Sydney Airport. And I think that would have assisted Rex. I think they've made public statements to that effect, would have assisted Rex in having a more competitive schedule. Whether that would have offset other commercial factors, I don't know. That's beyond regulation. But I want to clearly and explicitly say, Ross, both governments, the coalition government and the Labor government, have failed to implement regulatory reform at Sydney Airport in a manner that could have supported additional competition. And that competition is important for consumers. Not here to say Rex should have survived and someone should have underwritten them. I see that bailouts are being talked about. That's not necessarily particularly good public policy, throwing taxpayers' money at a particular commercial operation. But what governments are responsible for is the regulatory structure. And in both cases, the coalition and the Labor government have failed to act.
I'll tell you what, Peter Harris, it's always good to have you in the program, and many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Ross.